We're in Ezra chapter 5, and last week we noticed the first two verses of chapter 5, and in those verses we noticed that the people had built their own houses. Now, part of that knowledge came to us because we went back and looked at Haggai chapter 1, and they were not prospering. They were felt like they were poor, and they were not prospering like they thought they would when they went back to Jerusalem. And it was because they had not built the Lord's house first. They hadn't put God first in their lives, and so in a sense they were being punished for that. God had them go back home for the purpose of building that temple and the walls of Jerusalem. But instead, they went home and they didn't do what God wanted them to do, the purpose for which He had them released from Persian captivity. And so we saw a lot of that in Haggai chapter 2. We also mentioned that Nehemiah would be good to read to get some of that background. Both prophets that we saw, Zechariah and Haggai, and getting our background, those prophets, the first thing they did when they began to encourage the people to do what they were supposed to do is they called the governor, Zerubbabel, and the high priest, Jeshua, on the carpet. Now notice that. Where did they start? Did they go out and start talking to the people and oh, you need to do this and you need to do that and y'all need to get busy? No, they went to the leaders. And there's an important principle there. We're sometimes told in America, oh, our leaders don't determine what we do and they can't break down or build up society. Well, we've seen, if we're paying attention, that is not true. It all starts with leadership. In congregations, we have to have a leadership that is dedicated to doing what God says to do and to urge the people to do it. And when you urge the people to do it, just like in the case of Zerubbabel and Jeshua, guess what happens? It gets done. The work gets done. And so once they were rebuked, they led the people, and the people responded. And people will always respond to good leadership, just like they sometimes respond to bad leadership. And they can either become corrupt or they can become good. One of the two. And that brings us to verse 3 through 5 that we're going to notice now and where we will begin tonight. At the same time came to them Tatnai, governor on this side of the river, and Sheth-Bozniah and their companions, and said thus unto them, Who hath commanded you to build this house and to make up this wall? Then said we unto them after this manner, What are the names of the men that make this building? But the eye of their God was upon the elders of the Jews, that they could not cause them to cease, till the matter came to Darius. And then they returned answer by letter concerning this matter. So at the same time that they began doing the work that Haggai and Zechariah had told them they need to get back to doing, the building of this temple, the rebuilding of the temple, the enemies of Judah, these Samaritans, they came to them, but notice there's a governor here. And this governor is responsible to Darius, the king of Persia. And so Tatnai is this governor. And we're going to see some really interesting things about him. There's not a whole lot said about him personally, but you can gather a number of facts from what is seen. Under Darius, the king of Persia, the empire was divided into 20 satrapies. Now, that's kind of like what we might consider today our states. It was divided into provinces and different areas. And we would if we try to visualize it according to what we have today, it'd be like the United States and divided into 50 states. That's the way Persia, the empire, was divided. And each one of these was ruled by a governor who reported only to Darius. Didn't report to anybody else. He didn't report to a council. He didn't report to another group of people. He reported only to Darius. They were called satraps. And Tatnai appears thus to be the ruler over the satrap of Syria, the Arabian desert, Phoenicia, and Samaria. These areas we know by those names. He was the governor over that particular area. So if you draw in your mind or visualize in your mind a map of what we call the Holy Land, rather wrongly, but still gives you the idea. You can see those areas and you can gather where he ruled. As governor, he was responsible to let Darius know of any new thing or big thing that began to happen in the territory. If he heard of rebellion that was going on, he had to report it. If a building project began, a city, etc., he had to report it. And so this major building program is going on in what was Jerusalem, and will be Jerusalem again, and it's the temple. And so he has to report this. But what's he going to do? Oh, you know, I heard about there may be a building project. No, he's going to do what he should do and go check it out. Let's find out what's going on here. He's simply doing his job, and he does it proficiently. Tatnai seems to be very different from those who acted as governors before him, whom the Samaritans were able to influence, terrify, possibly to, you either do what we tell you or we'll speak bad to the king, etc., or whatever way it was. He was not going to be controlled, Tatnai was not going to be controlled or bullied by the Samaritan people or their leaders. That's a man of integrity. Nor did it appear that he had any particular prejudice toward the Jews. He was a man who ruled by law and the facts. He wasn't going to make any decision without following the law and the facts of the matter. And so he goes and he finds out. I want you to think about God's providence here for a moment. We know from, for instance, the book of Daniel, that God, through his providence, set up kings, and still does today, whether we call them presidents or prime ministers or whoever it is, to punish his people because of their sins. He providentially set up that they would be released because of a king that he named in Isaiah 150 years before he was ever born. Providentially now, he has a governor over this region that we mentioned earlier who does not have any prejudice, who's not afraid of the Samaritans, who will not bow to public pressure. And he has a king, Darius, who also has been brought to the throne providentially to help the Jews to accomplish what needs to be done. This is providentially exactly what the Jews needed at this particular time, just as they had needed it in the past. God had providentially placed leaders over his people who were favorable to them in the past, and he's doing it at this particular time of our text. King Cyrus, remember, was brought to the throne particularly for the purpose of telling the Jews and the other people of other nations they could all go back to their homelands. They could all rebuild their capital cities that had been destroyed by the Babylonians and kept that way by the Persians, they could all go back and build their religious houses. That favored the Jews. King Darius is now on the throne, and now a governor named Tatnai over the particular satrap. Notice that when the time was right, the remnant was willing to obey. When they were willing to obey, God provided. Do you think it's any different today? When God's people reach a point where they're willing to obey, God's going to provide. We can count on it. It's going to happen. In between Cyrus and Darius, the people were more concerned about their own dwelling places than God's temple. Oh, let's build our personal places to live. Let's make sure we got a nice warm place to be at night and warm beds. God said, build my temple. 2 kings were allowed to come between Cyrus and Darius. And neither one of these kings cared one whit about righteousness. They were very corrupt. In fact, one of them was assassinated a short time after he came to the throne. Neither one of them lasted very long. Now notice Tatnai's inquiry. He asked, who's responsible for this building project? Who gave, in other words, you the authority to build this building project? Who gave you that authority? Who's responsible? Tatnai is gathering information, and he's going to do with it exactly what he's supposed to. He's going to send it to King Darius, and he's going to ask some questions of the king, or ask the king, we should say, to do something. Again, look at the fairness of Tatnai. Until he received a reply from Darius, he didn't intend to do anything. He's going to let them continue to build. That's a lot different than what we saw earlier, isn't it? When we look at the Samaritans and the pressure they put on whoever the governor was at that time to halt the work. No, until he gets an answer from Darius, he's not going to stop this. In Psalm 33 and verses 18 through 22, think about what's written there. Behold, the eye of the Lord is upon them that fear him. Another terminology there is not just being afraid, but also it carries the idea of reverence. The eye of the Lord is upon them that fear and reverence him, upon them that hope in his mercy, to deliver their souls from death and to keep them alive in famine. Our soul waiteth for the Lord. He is our help and our shield. For our heart shall rejoice in him, because we have trusted in his holy name. Let thy mercy, O Lord, be upon us, according as we hope in thee. Now notice that last phrase, according as we hope in thee. If our hope is not firmly entrenched, if our trust is not firmly entranced in God, then how can we hope for his mercy, for his help? And that raises a question that we all should ask ourselves from time to time. Do I really trust God? Do I really trust in his mercy and his grace? Do I? We all need to ask that of ourselves from time to time. Now, notice what these Jewish leaders They didn't shrink in fear when the governor comes to talk to him like they had done earlier. They didn't shrink in fear from this opposition that's being raised. This governor, more than likely, he'd been approached, and I say more than likely, he'd been approached, my opinion, by the Samaritans and said, hey, they're building that temple down there. They're rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. You better check it out. Why were these leaders of the Jews now not intimidated? Because they believed God. They believed that God was on their side. They trusted God to protect them, and they knew if we do what God tells us to do, He is going to bless us. I hear people sometimes, I've heard them over the years in places where I've preached, say, well, if we do what that exercise, that discipline on the people, well, it's not going to work. And fear of people. That's what had happened to the Jews. They had become fearful of the people around them. And so they didn't do what God told them to do. And therefore, God didn't bless them. Haggai and Zechariah. In Psalm 2 and verse 12, we're told, blessed are they. And I might just mention, in our King James, and I believe the American Standard uses this too, the word blessed. And modern people have gotten to the point where they say it means blessed. No. Look it up even in a dictionary, a good dictionary today, and you'll see that the pronunciation of that word is blessed. That's it, not blessed. Blessed is denominational speak. Blessed are they that put their trust in Him. Psalm 2 and verse 12. God will bless us. One of the interesting things about the word blessed is that it carries the idea of being happy. If we do what God tells us to do, if we trust Him like we ought to, we will be happy. Nobody can take that happiness away from us. In Psalm 5 and verse 11, let all those that put their trust in Thee rejoice. Do we rejoice when we study God's Word? When we see what He's told us to do, and when we know that we are honestly trying to do what He tells us to do? The Bible says, let all those, not just one or two, who put their trust in Thee, in God, rejoice. Let them ever shout for joy. Because Thou defendest them. When the enemy's attacking, when denominationalism attacks, when possibly our government attacks, when our educational system attacks, do we put our trust in God so that He will defend us? But notice the rest of that verse. Let them that love Thy name be joyful in Thee. Psalm 7 and verse 1. O Jehovah my God, in Thee do I put my trust. Listen to him. Save me from all them that persecute me, and deliver me. There was a trust that David, who was commissioned to write this psalm by God Almighty, there was a trust that he could then appeal to God, save me from them that persecute me, and deliver me. obviously from harm that they might intend. Let's look at verses 6 through 17. I'm clumping this whole group together. The copy of the letter, now notice, Tatnai, this governor, is going to do exactly what he's supposed to do, report what's going on in the province that he has been placed over to Darius the king. The copy of the letter that Tatnai, governor on this side the river, and Shethar-Boznai, he appears to be a kind of a secretary for Tatnai, and his companions, the Apharshites, which were on this side the river, sent unto Darius the king. They sent a letter unto him, wherein was written thus: Unto Darius the king all peace. Be it known unto the king that we went into the province of Judea, to the house of the great God, which is builded with great stones, and timber is laid in the walls, and this work goeth fast on, and prospereth in their hands. Then asked we those elders, and said unto them, Who commanded you to build this house, and to make up these walls? And we asked their names also to certify thee, that we might write the names of the men that were the chief of them. And thus they returned to us answer, saying, We are the servants of the God of heaven and earth, and built the house that was builded these many years ago, which a great king of Israel builded and set up. But after that our fathers had provoked the God of heaven unto wrath, he gave them into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, the Chaldean, who destroyed this house and carried the people away into Babylon. But in the first year of Cyrus, the king of Babylon, the same King Cyrus made a decree to build this house of God. And the vessels also of gold and silver of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took out of the temple that was in Jerusalem, and brought them into the temple of Babylon, those did Cyrus the king take out of the temple of Babylon, and they were delivered unto one whose name was Sheshbazzar, whom he had made governor, Zerubbabel, and said unto him, Take these vessels, go carry them into the temple that is in Jerusalem, and let the house of God be builded in this place. Then came the same Sheshbazzar, and laid the foundation of the house of God, which is in Jerusalem, and since that time, even until now, hath it been in building, and yet it is not finished. Now therefore, if it seem good to the king, let there be search made in the king's treasure house, which is there at Babylon, whether it be so, that a decree was made of Cyrus the king to build this house of God at Jerusalem. And let the king send his pleasure to us concerning this matter. The character of Tatnai. It is clearly seen, I believe, in these passages. He investigated to get the facts. Didn't allow pressure from the people to influence him. He clearly had no hidden agenda. And so he sends the report. And he says the house of the great God was being built. Think about that. Here's a heathen, a non-believer, and he refers to him as the great God. There's something that we need to understand. And when you go home tonight and you read chapter 5 of Daniel, this will help you to understand what's going on. This house being built, the great house of God, the great God. In those times of a pantheism of gods, people did not insult another god because they believed in such a multitude of gods. As long as you didn't denigrate their particular god that they favored, hey, you're okay, I'm okay. Your God's okay, my God's okay. We get along. They just all go together. Does that sound familiar to modern day? That's the way they thought. And when you see what Belshazzar did in chapter 5, then the reaction of God Almighty in that very hour is easy to understand. What he did was not done in that time. You didn't denigrate another. They're okay. My God right now has been better than yours because he won the war, but he's okay. And I might just sidetrack this little bit more. Someone would say, well, when Nebuchadnezzar took the items from the temple, those holy items, don't forget that, they were holy items. When he took those and put them in the house of his God, well, wasn't he denigrating God? No, he wasn't. He put them in a place of respect that he held. His God, the one he believed had overpowered the God of Israel and given them victory. He was not denigrating God at all in their minds. He was putting those holy items in a place of respect, a place that he respected. And even his people, basically. Belshazzar denigrated God by what he did. Back to our lesson. The house of the great God is being built. He says great stones and timbers were being used. Some of the stones of the temple were believed to have been over 120 tons for one stone. That's beyond our comprehension. That would be 60 automobiles today, if you can wrap your head around that. Great stones and timbers are being used. The timbers, where'd they come from? Lebanon. The timbers, the cedars of Lebanon. He also reports that the work is going well. Progress is being made, but the house still isn't finished. The implication is the house should have been finished long before this. Even he understood that. He reported the names of the leaders of the project. Even though they're not mentioned to us here, we know who it was. Zerubbabel and Jeshua, the high priest. He mentions that the great king of Israel, who's that? Solomon. David, remember, gathered all the materials for the temple to be built. And Solomon, his son, because David was a man of war and was not allowed to build that temple, did construct the temple. So he's referring to Solomon, a great king of Israel, built the original. And he told the reason that their God had allowed the temple to be destroyed. Isn't that interesting? He gives this history. He knows some of this history. And he tells them that they disobeyed their God. That's why Nebuchadnezzar was able to defeat them, because God punished his people. He put them into this bondage, and he destroyed the city of Jerusalem and this temple. God did it, not Nebuchadnezzar. Oh, Nebuchadnezzar was the instrument. But if God had not wanted that temple destroyed, if God had not wanted those walls to be destroyed, they wouldn't have been destroyed. They claim that Cyrus, these Jews, in reporting to Tatnai when he asked his questions, they claim that Cyrus had issued a decree for them to rebuild the city and the temple. And they said that Cyrus had given the temple instruments, utensils, back that Nebuchadnezzar had taken to be used in the temple. And he said, the building is still under construction. Think about something here. I don't know if this thought interests you or not, but it did me. When they were asked who had commanded them to build this temple, did you notice what happened? How had the Jews answered? We are the servants of the God of heaven and earth. Did you catch that? In essence, what they were saying was, God told us to do it. That's what they were saying. God told us to do it. I'll guarantee you that got Tatnai's attention. I called him the great God. They're telling me that God's the one who did this. Their secondary answer was that Cyrus, King Cyrus, had told them to. And when you combine their answers, what you're seeing is that they were in essence saying God authorized it through his servant Cyrus. Look at how God operated and marvel how he took care of his people, how he provided for them when the time fit his schedule, not theirs, his schedule. I can't help but think about the schedule for Messiah. Before time ever began, before there was an earth, stars, planets, solar systems, etc., the plan had been devised by the Godhead. But it had to come after certain things were done. Man had to be shown, first of all, that you're sinful and you can't save yourselves. You need a Savior. Thus, the patriarchal age, the Mosaic age. And the book of Galatians tells us that when the fullness of time was come, that's when the Messiah came into the world. All of those things, those four empires that you see mentioned in Daniel, each of them contributed certain things that had to be put in place before Messiah could come into the world. Where do you think the synagogues came from? They were developed in Babylonian captivity. Why? Because their great feast days were commanded to be done at Jerusalem, at the temple, which no longer existed. How are they going to keep their people informed of what God says? And encourage them to hold on. God's going to take care of this. Oh, they developed synagogues where they studied the Bible, encouraged each other. Where did the apostles go first? Everywhere where they traveled. The synagogues. Why? There were a people there at the synagogues who believed in the one God. Oh, their religion may have passed away at the death of Jesus on the cross, the law of Moses. But you see how God has prepared? Oh, the Persians, which came next, what did they contribute to the fullness of time? The idea of absolute law. Remember as you study the book of Esther, how the whatever the king said could not be changed? The belief in absolute law. And by the way, the kingdoms that followed Persia had that same belief. You see how it's filtering down? Oh, and the Greeks, what did they provide? And I'm not giving you everything that they provided, but I'm giving you highlights. What did the Greeks provide that was so necessary for the coming of Messiah? The one whose blood, the only blood, they forgive men of their sins both before and after the cross. The only blood. Oh yeah. There was a language now that had been spoken now throughout all of the known world because Alexander the Great had carried that language to all of these nations. So now there was a common language that somebody, wherever you were, could understand. You know, today we have a common language in the world. It's American English. You can go almost anywhere in the world today and somebody will know some bit of English so that you can be understood. Fullness of time. Oh, a language that can be used all over the Roman Empire, all over the known world. Oh, but then what about Rome? What did Rome do? Are you familiar with the term Pax Romana? I know some of you probably are. That's the Latin for peace, the world peace, brought by the Romans. During their time, the world was basically at peace. That doesn't mean there weren't little scrimmages that came up. Some people tried to rebel against them and they had to put it down. But basically there was a time of universal peace. That's what Pax Romana means, universal peace. They built roads. Oh, they didn't build them for, at least they didn't realize they built them for the gospel, but they did. They built them so that their armies could travel quickly from one place to another in case there was a rebellion or they needed their troops to get to these places to put down a rebellion. But those same roads with garrisons that were linked all up and down through those roads meant a place of safety, basically, for people to travel, for commerce. And where you have commerce that is worldwide, you have the expression of ideas and thoughts. You see what took place? God prepared the time. Just as He had done for the people here, He prepared the time for Messiah. Here, He prepared the time for His people to be released from the original Babylonian captivity, followed by Persian captivity, to go home to build His temple. Tatnai thus made a request of Darius. He said, search the records. But notice something. There's something very pertinent here. He didn't ask him just to search the records. He asked him to search the records at Babylon. That's important. Because when the records at Babylon were searched, they didn't find any record of Cyrus allowing the Jews to go home. And he wanted them to give, or he wanted Darius to give them, or him, Tatnai, an answer. How do you want me to proceed? Consider the time frame here. Chapter 5 reveals a resumption of the work of the rebuilding of the temple. Because of their enemies, it had ceased for a time and was just barely being done. Remember that Haggai told them the situation around them did not matter. Don't you be afraid of these people. You better rebuild the temple. That's what God put you here for. You better do it. Zechariah, Nehemiah, had come and encouraged them to continue rebuilding the temple. Chapter 6 will show the completion of the temple. I like something Roper said here. He said, when we do what God has instructed us to do, when we put first things first, obey God, and begin to do the work with steadfastness and wisdom, we allow God to work through us to accomplish His will. That's a major lesson, I believe, in these chapters. Next week, we're going to come back and look at chapter 6, and we're going to see the record was not found in Babylon as Tetnai asked the king. So how did he find out? We'll come back there next week.